Imagine you're an occupying soldier. You have been completely backed into a corner on this high, rocky hill. Your army is surrounded by local rebel forces, your supply lines are cut, and honestly, worst of all, you are entirely out of ammunition.
Right, a complete nightmare scenario.
Yeah, you are days away from losing the war. And then the rebel commander sends someone up the hill to literally hand you a crate of bullets. Live ammunition just given right to the enemy.
Which is just, I mean, it's unthinkable.
Right. And their only condition is, please stop using our sacred temple for target practice.
It completely defies all conventional military logic. But, when it comes to the preservation of history, human behavior rarely follows logic.
And that incredibly tense, honestly irrational moment is the heartbeat of today's deep dive. We're exploring a fascinating architectural archive novel simply titled Parthenon.
And specifically, we're zeroing in on a chapter called The Survival of the Wounded Giant.
Yeah, so if you think you know the Parthenon, like if you're picturing that pristine, untouchable relic sitting quietly in a textbook, we basically need to shatter that image right now.
Absolutely. Throw the textbook out.
Exactly. We aren't looking at the golden age of ancient Greece today. We're not going to talk about how they engineered those massive columns or, hoisted the roof up in antiquity.
Right, because the true miracle of the Parthenon isn't really that it was built. I mean, the miracle is that it's still standing at all.
Yeah.
When you dig into the sources, what emerges is this portrait of a living organism that is just absolutely covered in scars.
Wounds from human greed, from desperate wars, and ironically enough, wounds from people trying to, quote-unquote, preserve it.
Right, preservation.
So let's start with the most visible scars on the building today. If you walk up to the Parthenon and look just beneath the reef line, right between the heavy structural beams, you'll notice these glaring, empty square holes.
They look exactly like extracted teeth.
Yes, just gaps where something incredibly vital used to be.
And those voids are where the metopes were originally installed. Now, just for context, in classical architecture, metopes aren't just decorative trim.
They're a big deal.
Huge. They were these massive, incredibly intricate marble relief sculptures that told the mythological stories and battles of Athens. I mean, they were the visual voice of the building.
And they didn't just, fall out from an earthquake or natural decay or anything.
No, they certainly didn't.
This brings us to a really cold, calculated operation in 1801. It was led by Lord Elgin, who was the British ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, which controlled Greece at the time.
Right.
And he basically starts pulling these sculptures down under this incredibly convenient guise of collection or preservation.
What's truly fascinating and honestly tragic when you look at the historical accounts is the sheer mechanical violence of that so-called preservation.
Yeah, it's brutal.
It really is. Elgin's agent on the ground was a man named Giovanni Battista Lucieri. We have these accounts of him standing high up on rickety wooden scaffolding, actively directing local workers to just rip these massive stones out of the architecture.
It wasn't like, taking a painting off a wall.
Sure.
These were integrated structural components.
Exactly. And that created a massive logistical nightmare for them. They managed to pry some of these heavy stones loose, but Elgin's crew had brought wooden shipping crates from Britain.
Okay, right.
And the ancient stones simply didn't fit into the boxes.
Wait. They planned this massive historical heist and brought the wrong size boxes?
Basically, yes. The marble blocks were just too thick. So rather than, figure out a new transportation method, Lucieri makes this horrifying decision.
Oh, no.
He orders his men to take giant iron saws and physically saw the backs off 1,000-year-old marble sculptures.
You're kidding.
No, just to shave them down to fit the required dimensions of their shipping crates.
That is sickening.
Yeah.
To just hack away at a masterpiece because your box is too small.
It's unbelievable.
The source text has these descriptions of the workers literally smashing through the ancient cornices, those decorative overhanging ledges, just to get leverage for the saws. And as those iron blades cut into the stone, the white marble dust rained down to the ground. The archive describes it falling like screams.
It is such a visceral, haunting image. Lucieri didn't care about the grain of the marble, and he certainly didn't care about the structural integrity of the temple itself.
Right.
The original architect of the Parthenon, a guy named Iktinos, designed the building with this brilliant geometric integration, Every single piece relied on the tension and weight of the others.
So it's all connected.
Right. By violently hacking out those meritopes, Elgin's crew completely shattered that organic, unified design.
You know, hearing this, it feels like someone ripping the best pages out of a classic novel just to frame them on a wall.
Oh, that is a brilliant way to look at it.
Right, because you get a pretty picture for your living room, sure. But you completely destroy the story in the process. You're left with this broken spine and a narrative that makes zero sense.
That is precisely what happened.
Yeah.
In a building like this, the sculpture is the very language of the space. It's how the architecture speaks to the people walking around it.
Yeah.
So when those sculptures were shipped off and locked away in the cold, gray interior of the British Museum in London, their fundamental nature changed.
They lost their context.
Completely. They were stripped of the bright Mediterranean sun, the coastal winds, the physical presence of those high columns. They transformed from the living, breathing voice of Athens into, well, stuffed, silenced artifacts.
Leaving the building is just a skeleton, really. Forced to prove its majesty with its bones alone, and those empty, hollow gaps where the metatopes used to be. They actually serve as a monument of their own now.
They do.
Just a glaring, permanent record of human greed.
Now, Elgin rationalized his actions by claiming the locals didn't care about their own ruins. He said he had to rescue the art because the Greeks would just let it crumble.
Wow.
But just 20 years later, those very locals would prove him entirely wrong.
Which brings us back to that unbelievable scene from the start of our deep dive. So if we move our attention from the roof down to the very foundation of the building, those massive, iconic Doric columns, you'll find another set of violent scars.
Yeah, these ones are very different.
If you walk up close to those fluted pillars, you can see deep, ugly chisel marks gouged right into the middle of the marble drums.
But the motivation behind these wounds was vastly different from Lord Elgin's theft. These marks take us directly into the Greek War of Independence, specifically the siege of the Acropolis around 1821 and 1822.
Right. So, setting the scene here, the Ottoman army is occupying the high ground of the Acropolis. The Greek forces have them completely surrounded, cutting off their supply lines.
Classic siege tactics.
Exactly. The Ottoman troops are trapped up there with the temple, and they run completely out of ammunition. They're absolutely desperate. So they start looking at the ancient architecture around them for anything they can use as a weapon.
And to understand the mechanics of what happens next, you have to know a little bit about ancient masonry.
Okay.
When the original Greek builders stacked those massive marble drums to create the columns, they didn't just balance them on top of each other, they secured them.
Oh.
They carved hollow channels into the center of the stones and poured molten lead into the core.
Wait, why lead specifically? Why not like iron pegs or something?
No, it's a genius piece of ancient engineering. If you use iron, it rusts over time. And when iron rusts, it expands, which would literally shatter the stone from the inside out.
Oh, wow. I never thought of that.
Right. But lead is incredibly malleable. It doesn't rust, and it acts as this flexible, shock-absorbing pin that allows the columns to slightly shift and sway during an earthquake without collapsing.
That is so smart. But the Ottoman soldiers knew the lead was in there.
They did.
So they take their chisels and they start hacking violently into the sides of the ancient columns, trying to dig out those lead cores so they can melt them down and cast them into bullets to shoot back at the Greeks.
The very material designed by ancient engineers to hold the temple together was being ripped out to be used as a tool of death.
We have this wild account from the source text of a Greek fighter named Stavros. He's hiding out in the rocks below the Acropolis, and he's just listening to the clang, clang, clang of the enemy chisels destroying his ancestors' sacred temple.
It must have been agonizing.
And this is where Stavros and his commanders make that decision we talked about in the intro. They gather up their own precious lead bullets and offer them to the enemy.
Yeah.
Now, hold on. I have to push back here.
Okay, go for it.
You're telling me a starving, desperate rebel army handed their enemy live ammunition? That makes zero tactical sense. I mean, surely some generals must have revolted against that order. You are actively arming the people trying to kill you.
You would absolutely expect a mutiny, right? I mean, it is military suicide on paper.
Yeah.
But you have to understand the immense psychological weight of that moment. To those Greek fighters, the Parthenon wasn't just a structure, it was the physical embodiment of their identity. The historical accounts actually equate the sound of those chisels hitting the marble to the feeling of watching your own parents being tortured.
Wow.
Every strike of the hammer was chipping away at their cultural soul.
So they literally sent a message saying, you know, here are bullets. Kill us if you have to, but please don't touch the columns.
It is an unparalleled moment of sacrifice. And it fundamentally answers the question of what allows a monument to survive the centuries.
Right.
The Parthenon didn't survive that brutal siege because marble is durable. Marble shatters under artillery fire. It survived because of a sheer, irrational human will to protect cultural heritage over immediate military victory.
That is powerful.
The Greeks decided that winning a country meant absolutely nothing if they lost the soul of that country in the process.
Man, they armed their own enemy to protect the stone. But you'd think that after sacrificing so much to save the building, the Greeks would protect it at all costs once they actually won.
You would think so.
And yet, there's a massive historical irony waiting for us. Because once Greece finally won its independence in 1834, they ended up destroying a massive chunk of the Acropolis themselves.
Yes. This introduces a highly controversial chapter in the history of archaeology. It revolves around a movement called katharismos, which translates to purification.
Set the scene for us. Because when the first king of independent Greece, King Otho I, arrives in Athens in 1834, the Acropolis does not look like the majestic, isolated plateau we see in vacation photos today.
Not at all. We really have to remember that for centuries, the Acropolis had been a living, breathing neighborhood.
Right. People actually lived up there.
Exactly. It was essentially a bustling, heavily fortified slum. There were Ottoman houses built right up against the ancient columns, literally using the marble as back walls. There was a ruined mosque sitting right inside the main chamber of the temple. There were Byzantine additions, medieval brickwork scattered everywhere. It was this chaotic, messy, layered collage of 1,000 years of continuous human habitation.
And the new government, working alongside a team of European archaeologists led by a man named Ludwig Ross, they looked at that messy, layered reality and essentially said, no, this is completely unacceptable.
They wanted the pure Parthenon back. They were obsessed with resurrecting the glorious, untouchable ideal of the 5th century BC, and they viewed anything built after that golden age as an impurity.
Like a weed.
Exactly, a historical weed that needed to be pulled out so the ancient marble could breathe.
And so began the katharismos.
Yeah.
The archives detail the experiences of local masons, men like Nikolaos, who were hired by the archaeologists to systematically dismantle these homes. Imagine standing there with a sledgehammer, looking at a modest little brick wall that literally just yesterday was someone's actual home. It provided shelter. Generations of families lived there. And you were ordered to smash it to pieces to rescue the soul of Athens.
By tearing down the Ottoman houses and destroying the mosque and erasing the Byzantine walls to make it look purely classical, they were making a massive value judgment about whose history mattered.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. So they were essentially applying a heavy social media filter to history.
Oh, how do you mean?
Well, you know how you take a photo of a messy living room, but you carefully crop out the huge pile of laundry in the corner and maybe bump up the contrast so everyone online thinks your life is perfectly put together?
I see where you're going. The curated aesthetic over the lived reality.
Right. They acted like a giant historical eraser. They just deleted 1,000 years of messy, complex, real human life to get that perfect angle for the history books.
That is a fantastic analogy, and it is crucial for you, the listener, to keep in mind when you look at pictures of the Parthenon today.
Yeah.
The clean, majestic, isolated monument you see standing proudly alone on the rock is actually a highly curated, artificial fake.
A fake.
Well, an edited reality. It is a masterpiece of 19th century staging. By trying to save the ancient monument, they destroyed the archaeological evidence of all the generations of people who had actually sought shelter against its walls.
It's kind of tragic.
It is. The Parthenon you visit today is a version of history that prioritizes a romanticized ancient ideal over the tangible, lived reality of the centuries in between.
It's wild to think that preservation can actually be a form of destruction.
Completely.
And if you're listening to this thinking, well, thank goodness we have strict modern heritage laws to protect these things now, you might want to brace yourself for what is happening right now.
Oh, yes.
Because that highly edited, purified monument sitting alone on its pedestal is facing a completely new, entirely inventable threat. Yep.
Yeah.
You. The millions of tourists who visit every year.
That's true.
There are these vivid modern descriptions in the sources of the stylobate. It's the stepped platform and main floor of the temple, as it looks today, under the blazing Mediterranean sun. The marble has been polished so completely smooth by millions of footsteps that it actually shines like a jewel.
Mm-hmm.
You can practically see your reflection in it.
And while that might sound beautiful, structurally, it is a slow-motion disaster.
Because it's not a museum floor, it's ancient stone.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is the paradox of modern tourism. Tourism generates the millions of dollars absolutely necessary to fund the continuous, painstaking restoration of the Acropolis.
Which they need.
But the tourists themselves are causing an immense amount of consistent erosion.
I mean, I get the dirt on the shoes thing. You track in sand, it acts like sandpaper.
Yes, that is mechanical weathering. Every footstep grinds that grit into the marble.
Yeah.
But there's a chemical side to this that is entirely invisible. It's their breath.
Their breath, come on. How does breathing hurt a rock?
I know it sounds dramatic, but it's actually basic chemistry on a massive scale.
Okay.
When thousands of people are constantly exhaling around these stones day after day, they are releasing carbon dioxide. That CO2 mixes with the ambient moisture in the air and the humidity from their breath to create a weak carbonic acid.
Oh, wow. I had no idea.
And marble is primarily composed of calcium carbonate. When calcium carbonate meets carbonic acid, it slowly dissolves. So the collective, adoring breath of millions of visitors is quite literally accelerating the chemical weathering of the stone.
That is insane.
We are loving the giant to death.
But, the archives don't just treat the tourists like a plague of locusts.
Mm-hmm.
There's a really beautiful, poignant account that explains why we are all so drawn there, even if our presence is slowly eroding it.
Yes, I love this part.
There's a story of a woman named Anna. She's a tourist visiting the Acropolis in the 1950s, right after the total devastation of World War II.
A time when the whole world felt like it had just barely survived its own complete destruction.
Right. And Anna's standing there looking up at these battered, scarred, chipped columns. And she just starts to weep. She tells her friend, even if our world is ending, if we disappear, these stones prove how noble humans once were.
That is the emotional core of why this building matters. And it's something I want you, the listener, to really consider.
Yeah.
When you travel to a place like the Parthenon, what are you actually looking for? Are you looking for a history lesson? Are you looking for an aesthetic experience? Or are you just looking for a cool selfie to prove you were there?
The monument just stands there and absorbs it all.
It absorbs all those human desires silently. It has taken the cannonballs, the chisels, the iron saws, and now the camera flashes in the footsteps.
Yeah.
Its stubborn, unyielding refusal to collapse is, in a way, the ultimate comfort to our own human mortality. We know we are temporary, but we look at that wounded giant and think, maybe something we build can last.
Man, so what does this all mean? If we step back and look at the whole picture we've uncovered today, the Parthenon is not just an ancient pile of rocks engineered by some clever Greeks.
No, not at all.
It is a wounded giant, and it's wearing its scars like military medals. It survived the literal saws of greedy British aristocrats who thought they were saving it.
Mm-hmm.
It survived the desperate, violent necessity of a war for independence. It survived the giant erasers of 19th century archaeologists who literally deleted a millennium of history to make it look pretty.
Yeah.
And today, it is quietly surviving the loving but chemically erosive breath of millions of modern tourists.
It is a testament to the fact that monuments aren't just built once. They are built, destroyed, redefined, and rebuilt by every single generation that interacts with them.
It really makes you rethink every historical site you've ever visited.
It does, and I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. Building on that concept of katharismos, that idea of purifying history that the 19th century scholars were so obsessed with,
Okay.
we can easily judge them for erasing 1,000 years of real human history just to make the Parthenon look perfect for us. But we have to ask ourselves, what messy, uncomfortable parts of our own modern history are we quietly erasing today, just so we can leave a clean legacy for the future?
Oh, man. There's a heavy one. Little historical social media filter for our own era. Well, thank you all so much for joining us on this deep dive. The next time you find yourself standing in front of a grand monument, don't just look at the grand design. Look for the scars. Keep questioning the stories behind the stone.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into the fascinating, tragic, and honestly miraculous survival story of the Parthenon. You know, when we picture this iconic Greek temple, our minds usually go straight to ancient philosophers, mythological gods, and flawless classical architecture. But today, we're focusing on an entirely different chapter. Because it begs a pretty profound question. What if the absolute most fascinating thing about the Parthenon isn't how it was built, but the horrific trauma it somehow survived? As we'll see today, The source material argues the Parthenon is way less of a static, untouchable ruin and much more like a living, heavily scarred organism on an incredible hero's journey. Let's kick things off with Section 1, Elgin's looting and empty spaces. Our journey starts in 1801, and you might be surprised to hear that the trauma the Parthenon faced here wasn't from a war or an explosion, it was from a saw. The source material uses this incredibly striking analogy from architectural historian Dr. Lee. He points out that the empty spaces left by the missing statues, those famous metopes, feel exactly like pulled teeth. When you look up at those spaces between the architrave and the roof, there are these vivid, violent scars from sharp saw blades and deep chisel marks. It literally feels like the architectural skeleton itself was mutilated. And this perfectly highlights the core architectural argument presented by the historians: organic, unified space versus dismantled souvenirs. See, the Parthenon was originally designed as this highly integrated, organic space where the sculptures acted as the very language of the building. But Lord Elgin, he didn't see a unified building. He just saw individual parts to be exported. To him, these carvings weren't part of some grand spatial narrative. They were just dismantled souvenirs meant to be packed away into crates. Let's look at just how systematic this 1801 mutilation really was. To fit these massive, magnificent sculptures into shipping crates, Lord Elgin's agents absolutely did not care about the marble's natural grain or the structural integrity of the building. Over days, weeks, and months, they violently smashed the cornices, cut straight through structural beams, and sawed down century-old marble just to make the backs of the sculptures thin enough to ship. They essentially turned the Parthenon's living narrative into taxidermy. Moving on to Section 2, marble traded for bullets. Let's jump ahead to 1821, during the Greek War of Independence. This is where the white marble was actively targeted for warfare. Now, I want to ask you this. How far would you go to save a building from your enemies? Ottoman soldiers, who were occupying the Acropolis at the time, found themselves completely out of ammunition. So, in a desperate move, they literally began hacking into the ancient Doric columns with chisels. But why attack the columns? Well, it's because of the lead cores. Ancient masons actually poured lead inside the column drums to bind them securely together. So when the Ottoman soldiers ran out of bullets, they started digging out this lead to cast new ones. Think about that for a second. The very structural binding of the temple was being violently extracted and repurposed into instruments of death. And this led to one of the most incredible moments of sacrifice in architectural history. Greek fighters were listening to the agonizing sound of chisels tearing into their ancestral temple, and they made a staggering decision. The source notes that fighters, like the historical figure Stavros, actually gathered their own ammunition and handed it right over to the enemy. They literally sent their bullets to the opposing army with a simple, desperate message: "Here are bullets. Please don't touch the columns." They chose to give their enemies the very weapons that might be used against them just to stop the destruction of their cultural soul. According to the source, what saved the Parthenon in this moment wasn't the physical strength of the marble. It was this profound, almost unimaginable human sacrifice. Which brings us to Section 3, an eraser named Purification. Surviving physical war was just one chapter. In 1834, the temple faced a completely different kind of threat. You know, if you visited the Acropolis before the 19th century, it didn't look like the neat, empty monument we know today. It was a bustling, messy neighborhood. But archaeologists ordered stonemasons to violently smash and clear away entire layers of history: Ottoman houses, the ruins of a mosque inside the temple, Byzantine walls, medieval brickwork. They essentially erased 1,000 years of authentic human life just to isolate the ancient Greek elements. They called this katharosmos, or purification. And what is truly fascinating is how modern historians critique this mindset. This 19th century archaeological movement acted like a giant eraser. To the archaeologists back then, anything built after the 5th century BC was considered an impurity that had to be forcefully removed to artificially isolate the classical era. This directly highlights a deep irony presented in the text: sanitized perfection versus authentic, messy history. The pure, majestic Parthenon we see today, standing all alone on the hill, it's actually a highly curated, edited version of the past. By deleting centuries of subsequent history to get that clean look, they gave us an artificial perfection that completely ignores the messy reality of the people who actually lived there for hundreds of years. Finally, let's look at Section 4, Survival of the Wounded Giant. Bringing us right up to the present day, this wounded giant of architecture faces a modern, quieter, but equally relentless trial: millions of tourists. Now, while mass tourism obviously brings vital funding needed for preservation, the text observes that the sheer volume of humanity is having a severe physical impact. Millions of footsteps, moisture from breath, and dirt carried on shoes are slowly wearing the ancient marble down until the floor actually shines like glass. It's a brand new kind of erosion, one born entirely out of global love. Yet the text counters this concern with a beautiful anecdote from a 1950s tourist named Anna. Visiting right after the horrors of World War II, she looked at the resilient columns and said, "Even if we disappear, these stones will prove how noble humans once were." She found profound hope in the structure's survival. For her, the stones weren't just old. They were a comforting anchor in a world recovering from immense tragedy. So, let's pull all of this together. The true power of the Parthenon isn't just in its flawless geometry. Just look at what it has endured. It survived physical mutilation by collectors. It survived military bombings and soldiers digging out its core. It withstood the historical erasure of overzealous archaeologists. And now it absorbs the mass desires and footsteps of modern tourism. The source makes a compelling argument that the Parthenon isn't just a relic. It is an active participant in history, taking absolutely all the damage humanity throws at it and remaining standing. I want to leave you with this provocative thought from the text to ponder. Is the Parthenon's greatest architectural feature simply its unstoppable will to survive? Perhaps our true awe shouldn't come from how perfectly it was built 2.5 millennia ago, but from the simple, miraculous fact that despite everything we've put it through, it is still here at all. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the messy history behind the monuments.